Hello, everybody. It's Liam here, and today I'm going to be walking you through why you guys are probably landing in spam on your cold email campaigns, or in general, just sending like on a whole. I've talked to a lot of business owners, and there's a lot of like these nuances that they don't really understand, and I'm going to be going through that in this, and I'm going to be going through like the back end and like public and private infrastructure. So I'm going to get like into it. So I have a Miro board here. This is the easiest way of explaining this, and I'm going to assume if you are watching this video, you understand the basics of just don't send spam words, don't have images, don't have links inside your initial emails, don't send videos. Basically, like have your DMARC SPF DKIM set up. If you don't, I have another video on this channel going through that whole thing. But you should also watch this because this explains one of the reasons that you can and you can't control. So when you send an email, right? Let's just think about this, right? When you send an email, there's two things. There's public and there's private infrastructure. And you're probably asking what the hell is that, right? So public infrastructure is stuff like Google and it's stuff like Microsoft. These are companies that have been there since the beginning of time. These like when you existed, these guys also existed. And they set everything up and they have the biggest infrastructure in the world and basically 90% of the world is on this. Like these guys are never disappearing, okay? And that's public infrastructure. Right? People have asked what this is. That's what it is. Private infrastructure is basically companies that set up their own company and they set up the back end of the IPs. They make the inboxes for you guys, and you basically buy the inboxes. And they do it at a cheaper price than Google and Microsoft. And that's just like how it works. And like these guys, so I'm gonna go through the benefits and like the pros and cons of each, basically. So before we do that though, you see this setup here where you have like your, oh, I'm gonna move that back. You have inboxes and you have IPs, right? The inboxes are connected to these IPs. This is just how this works, right? And then the IPs are kind of bunched up on a server together, which is this kind of gray bit. And then you have these IPs and they're owned by Google or they're owned by Microsoft. And these guys, like their IPs are also on their own kind of like turf, right? And then if you come into public infrastructure, right? The benefits of public infrastructure are they're going to never disappear, right? If Google and Microsoft disappear, the world is over. It's just one of those things. There's no downtime, or if there is, it'll be fixed very quickly because they have multi-billion dollars in this and they have the entire industry on wraps. There won't be much downtime. The deliverability is good. The reason being is if you get sent an email from Google or Microsoft, it's Google or Microsoft. People are like, okay, like it's used by 90% of the world. If you're sending from the 10%, you're probably not legit. Profile images, obviously, this is one thing, but if you can send image like an email to someone else and you have your image on the email, it looks just more legitimate in general. And you also have support. So like Google and Microsoft, obviously, they have billions and trillions and God knows the amount of money in this, and obviously they can afford the support, right? The negatives are it's expensive. If you've ever done cold email or if you've ever bought it as a Google Workspace, it's about $7, $7.20 I think for an inbox. They're stricter on policies. So Google especially has more policies than Microsoft on this. But I also do think Microsoft has worse deliverability than Google, but this is just assumptions at this point from all the emails I've sent. But just generally, they have stricter regulations than private infrastructure. They have a shared pool. So as you can see, as you can see in this, you're bunched in with a bunch of other inboxes. So let's say Timmy is this green box here, and like I don't know, Sarah is this second inbox here, and you are this inbox here, and Terry is this inbox here. It's like you're all connected to the same IPs, and I'll explain in a minute why that's important. And the last thing is it's a long setup time. So I mentioned DMARC, SPF, DKIM at the start of this. Yeah, they suck. They take forever to set up. If anybody's done that, it's probably one of the most painful processes I've ever done. So this is public infrastructure, right? This is the build out. This is the general layout. Okay, it's kind of a broad enough overview. And I'll get you like one of the reasons that you guys are landing in spam is because you guys are running a shared IP with other people. And I'll explain that in a second once I go past private infrastructure. So, private infrastructure, of course, is people that have set up businesses specifically for cold email. So they're the 10% of the world that are blasting probably 90% of the emails in the world, right? And as you can see, they have the exact same layout where it's like the inboxes are connected to IPs and they own the IPs, and you're basically buying the inboxes off them. And obviously, I guess the benefits and the negatives are it's cheaper. It's naturally cheaper. I think mail scale, like some of the prices are like it's like 100. I think you get 50 inboxes for like $100 dollars or something like that. The setup time is literally like a tenth of the time, just because like they can automate everything. Like you don't have to go in and set anything up. That's one of the crazy benefits of this, because time is obviously worth money, and they're also not as strict, which means that like even if you're following best practices, like you probably won't get flagged by these guys, or like you definitely won't, basically, because they built their entire infrastructure off this. So the negatives are you'll have worse deliverability, just because obviously these guys are again the 90%, and like if you're sending from this, you're not as trusted. And the other thing is, I'll get into it. So you have a shared pool, obviously, so you're sharing this with other people, and not as strict, which is also a negative, because the reason that these guys are so strict is because when there's a bad actor on a server, they can just remove them because they're just strict on their policies, which means the server is kept kind of cleaner. And it's also it's a positive and a negative. And then also support is probably not something that's as good in this realm of things because it's private and it's not a multi-trillion-dollar corporation. And okay, so before I go into IPs, which is like a whole different other setup, what I want to explain is one of the reasons you guys are probably landing in spam on your cold email campaigns on both public and private infrastructure is when everybody is connected to these same IPs, right? And don't take it as two IPs. Google probably has millions of IPs, okay? But when you're connected to the same IPs as someone, right? And let's say, I think this guy's name was Timmy, right? Let's say Timmy starts spamming, right? He starts completely spamming, right? And everybody in this, like, like the IP then is like, okay, this person's spamming, so Google bans this person, and he's now banned from the server. But what's happened is this one person that is spamming, this IP here is now screwed. Okay, so he was connected to this IP, right? This IP screwed. But when you, let's say you send from, wait, let me see if I can get a pin out, right? So when you send an email, right, this IP and this IP have to communicate. So you send to a Microsoft server. These have to communicate, right? And let's say this has been flagged for spam. Well, that just means that these guys won't accept you because you have a flagged person that's spam. So even though you are basically the golden child, right, and you've been following best practices, and you only get like a 1% or a 10% or 10% spam rate's a lot, or less than 1% spam rate, or you don't even get flagged for spam at all, it doesn't matter because when you are connected to these same IPs as this person, and this person screws you, you cannot send then. So your inboxes are fried and your IP is fried. And it's the same with this. It's worse here because at least on this one, they ban the person. On this one, there's no banning. So like, let's say this Timmy is back over here, and he does his shenanigans, right? And he starts spamming. Oh, sorry, and he starts spamming. Ooh, yeah, there you go. And instead of having like a, so I go P. Oh, sorry. So instead of having like a -1 reputation, right? Because there's one. What what happens is when let's say these guys try and communicate, or let's say when these guys try and communicate, it doesn't really matter, right? Instead of -1, they don't ban him, so it just keeps getting worse. So you get put on more blacklists. So if you use like MX Toolbox, instead of -1, you get like -2, and then -3, and then it's like the like it just keeps getting worse, and then -4, and then now you're stuck in this situation where like this person has just ruined the entire server. So these guys are all -4. They're all -4 now. And it's like, okay, so you've just screwed everyone on the server. And this is one of the reasons you're landing in spam, even though you're perfect, right? And this is what like the build outs are that like have problems with. So if I come over to private infrastructure with IP, so this is one of the solutions to everything. So the way this works is you have two separate private infrastructure kind of IP setups. One of them is where you buy the IPs. So if I was to kind of give this, so as you can see, these guys are when they connect to this IP, they're the only ones on this IP. So let's say you own these, right? You're the only one that owns these inboxes, right? You are the only one on this IP. So if this gets flagged, if this gets flagged, that's your fault, and you know it was your fault. So like that's your problem. Like that's your problem. And basically, the benefits and the negatives are like it's cheaper, it's a shorter setup time again. But it's I think it's longer. From my experience, it's longer than private infrastructure with inboxes. It's also a solo IP, so obviously that's a benefit. It's good deliverability. It's much better deliverability actually because you're the only one on this. The negatives are it's a shared server, which I'll explain in a second. There's the risk of the IP flagging. So if you only have one IP, then obviously if that gets flagged, then there's a problem because that's your only sending, and you might need a few to stop getting flagged. And then you have to run a slower warm up. The reason being is when you buy an IP, usually it hasn't been warmed up or touched at all. And you have to like slowly kind of ramp it up. And it's not like domains where you can just kind of like do two a day. Like you have to do like much slower with stuff like this. And then so I want to explain the shared server now. And the way this kind of works is IPs are placed on the same server, even if it's an IP. So like your inboxes are much safer now, right? These inboxes are having a great time. I hope you like my drawings, by the way. I can draw like this. This is incredible. I'm an artist, right? Basically, your IPs are still on a shared server. So Do You Mail has everything. So this is another like IP provider. They have everything on like a shared server like this. And let's say, okay, this is becoming a mess. I'm gonna be honest. This is becoming a mess. Let's say this person gets flagged. Let's say you're sending, right? And you get flagged, and these inboxes get flagged, and also the IP then gets flagged, right? You're still on the same IP like setup server as someone else. And to put it bluntly, like it has a smaller chance of happening, but you're able to affect this other IP since they're on the same kind of like server setup. And it's not as prevalent of happening, but like I've had it happen before where two IPs on different client accounts died at the same time on two different client accounts and they had different IPs. So it doesn't like it's a bit weird because like they are connected, but they're also not connected at the same time. And that's what they don't tell you. But then this last thing, okay, so this is private infrastructure IPs, but this is an isolated IP, right? And this also costs more, but that's like the benefits. So this is more expensive, a lot more expensive to say the least, as a shorter setup time, faster than this one. It's not as strict, but it is also kind of strict as long as you're just not an idiot, which is fine. And you have a solo IP pool. So the negatives obviously is the risk of the IP flagging, and you have to run slower warm up. And the way this works is obviously like it's a pretty self-explanatory where um instead of having these guys join together like that, you have a solo IP. So that means this is completely isolated from this one. So even if these guys go bust and they start spamming people and they spend all this money and it goes like this and this is flagged, you are completely safe. And this is literally what people don't like. This is the back end, right? And this is kind of how it works. And I've talked to people and they didn't understand why their stuff was just getting destroyed. Like I use a mixture of like all of this because some of it's cheaper, some of it's more expensive. You want to kind of diversify to make sure it's it all kind of works on that end. So this was a pretty quick video. I'm not sure how long it was, but hopefully this was useful. And if I run a lead generation agency called MTOS, and if you want something like this done for your business and you want to send between 30 and 45,000 emails a month and book between 5 to 25 meetings a month additionally, there should be a link below. But other than that, subscribe. More content like this will be coming out, and enjoy. Goodbye.